I forgot if we're doing the countdown.
We're live.
Oh, okay. Got a message saying we're live, so I guess we're live. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Vyvyane Loh, and thank you for joining me for today's live Q&A. Um, I'm eager to say hello to everyone and just to find out from you what questions you may have, and also anything you want to chat about with regards to metabolic health. Um, you can put your questions in the comment section. And also, just to remind everyone that I have the YouTube channel, VLMD Rounds. So my initials, VLMD, and then the word rounds, ROUNDS. And that's on YouTube. If you access my channel that way, please like and subscribe. And we put out podcast videos every week. I think we're on episode 7 currently, and week 8 will be coming out soon. You can also check out my website, vyvyanelohmd.com. So that's vyvyanelohmd.com. And if you go to the website, you can sign up for the newsletter. And I put out a newsletter once a month just to let people know what I'm up to, what projects I'm working on. I also tend to give a heads up on the different episodes that will be coming up for the month. So you can check that out again at the website, vyvyanelohmd.com. So in the meanwhile, um, I'm just waiting to see if there's anyone with a question for me. And if not, trying to check here. I don't. Okay. Hi, Maya. Thanks for checking in. And I know you have a meeting in a bit, but I appreciate you joining us and saying hi. And I am feeling a bit better. I still have a little bit of nasal drip. Um, took longer than I thought, but generally I'm feeling well. So thank you. Okay. So in the last few episodes, I started my slow trip towards insulin resistance. And I've been talking about carbohydrates. And then I talked this this episode, week 7, episode 7, I was focusing on gluconeogenesis and how we make glucose in the body. Because a lot of times we talk about gluconeogenesis, and sometimes I think we're not clear about what that really means. And it's one reason that, we have to take into account other macronutrients that we're eating if we're thinking about glucose in our bloodstream, other than just carbohydrates, all right? Because you can make carbohydrates, you can make glucose from proteins. It's pretty common for me to see on social media, and also sometimes patients will show me pictures of their meals. All right. And they will swear that they are doing a ketogenic diet. And you look at the picture and there's a huge steak, right? Or there's a huge serving of protein. And yeah, no, probably not going to be purely ketogenic. If you look at a traditional ketogenic diet, sort of the one that they use for medical therapies like epilepsy, it's traditionally a 4-to-1 ketogenic diet. Okay, what that means is that you have 4 grams of fat per 1 gram of carbs plus protein. Okay, so you have to figure in your protein input as well. Okay, and so a lot of people just think, oh, I don't eat carbs, and therefore, by definition, I'm ketogenic. No, you have to add up the carbs and proteins. Technically, if you're trying to strive for a ketogenic diet, right? And they have different ratios. They have 4-to-1s, they have 3-to-1s, even 2-to-1s, right? Not everyone has to be 4-to-1. And again, for most people, just doing low carb is going to give you very good results. But just so we're aware, because again, I see a lot of postings on social media and everybody's touting their ketogenic, quote unquote, diet with these huge portions of protein. I'm like, if we're being technical about this, yeah, no. Okay. All right. I don't know if there are other questions. I know some people have texted to say hi, but you can also put in your comments. Um, And then the next episode, I said I was talking about the opposite situation where we have high blood glucose and why that's bad. And then the episode after that, I am going to be talking about insulin resistance itself. And that's a big topic. And I hope that people will get a lot out of that because, again, I think there's sometimes some fuzziness around the insulin resistance issue. Okay. All right. I don't know if there are other topics that people want to hear about. Mm, Someone on LinkedIn was very kind to send me a paper recently, just a few days ago. Maybe it was yesterday. Time passes so quickly. And that paper was referencing time of activity, physical activity, and in relation to insulin handling in the body. And I put my comments up. I posted it on LinkedIn. So if you're not on LinkedIn, you can find me on LinkedIn and follow me. That's another way that you can access my content. But uh, what I just wanted to emphasize is that with circadian rhythm, there's so many inputs, right? It isn't just the day-night cycle, as most people are aware. There's so many clock oscillators, and skeletal muscle is a clock oscillator. Liver is a huge clock oscillator. Timing of meals, huge, right? So those are the things that help set your circadian rhythm. Day night is the strongest, but there are many other very strong clock oscillators. And that's why I feel like a lot of these studies that look at rhythmicity and time of day and circadian links, they're not so easy to do because you have to control for so many other factors. The other thing in that study, I think it was from Diabetologica, um, that did not consider, or they didn't at least put in the study the timing of meals and relation of timing of meals to the insulin sensitivity. So I think that's a big one. You're more insulin sensitive anyway in the morning, doesn't matter. So, maybe you're already at peak insulin sensitivity in the morning. So, any other additional inputs you have there may be less important than later in the day. Okay, so that's the other thing I want to do for these live Q&As going forward is that eventually if you come across a paper um, that you find interesting or that you want my input on, you want me to comment on, you can send it to me via my website. You can contact me with the information there or on LinkedIn, or I am on Instagram and Facebook, all these different platforms where you can access me. You can also just comment on the YouTube channel. And my intention is to pick one study. I'd like to do more, but I'll see with my time. I'll at least pick one study once a month and go over the study and then share it during the live Q&A and also comment on it during the live Q&A. So I think that would be fun for me just because I'll have also, extra eyes looking out for studies, interesting studies, and I'll be able to, just read a bit more. And it would hopefully bring about more of a discussion in these sessions. Okay, so if you do have papers that you are interested in, send them to me. Okay, and I would appreciate if you sent the whole paper, because if you just send the abstract and it's behind a paywall, then it might be hard for me to access. Okay. All right. I don't know if there are other people or other questions, and we can keep this short. My whole intention is just to provide a space to have people kind of interact, right? Maya, you want to know about timing of meals and exercise and what I would recommend. Okay, there's not a lot of manipulation most people can do. And the reason for that is if you're sleeping roughly 7 to 8 hours a day, right, then you've got to fit everything else within the remaining hours. And that includes your work and all the other activities you have to take care of. If you have kids, you have to manage that as well. So, one thing that we have people to do is schedule their meal times. And I already told you that timing of meals is a very important clock oscillator, right? Especially for the liver. So if your primary clock setter in your body is the SCN, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, then really the second main one is your liver clock, I think, right? So timing of meals is hugely important. So I have most of my patients actually schedule out their meals 4 to 5 times a day, depending on what regimen they're on. Now, if you're on 5 meals a day, that is going to put you in the every 3 to 3.5 hour category, right? Because if you wait longer than that, you'll be up all night, and that's going to cut into your sleep time. So it's roughly going to be every 3 to 3.5 hours, and then I try to keep those intervals clear of food because I want distinct meal times and distinct, especially protein boluses. Okay, so that's one reason we space it out that way. I generally will have people eat within an hour of waking up. The reason being that you're catabolic all night, mostly overnight. And so, especially if you have anabolic resistance with age, doesn't help you to wait even longer before you have your first meal, which is one of the main problems that you see with intermittent fasting, because I mostly will see people with intermittent fasting start their first meal at noon or beyond. So now they've gone overnight and they've been in a catabolic state, and we're going to wait even longer and have more catabolism before they actually have the first protein bolus, right? So, we generally try to have people have the first meal within an hour or so of waking up. And then in terms of with exercise, if it's preferable that people will kind of coordinate having a protein meal within half hour after exercise. You could do it also before, but I generally find that most people don't feel as comfortable if they've eaten something and then they're going to exercise. So it's easier to get the protein in after exercise. And I encourage it within a half hour post exercise. So those are the general recommendations. And of course, you might have to move things back and forth. But definitely, even though we do have people eat fairly frequently, they're not eating all day. I make sure I really want those intervals in between meals to be clear. And that's just giving your body very clear, distinct signals, meal bolus signals, right? Nutrient signals at those 3.5 hour intervals. So that is something I think that most people don't do generally, and getting our patients to follow that regimen is a big one. And also, once people miss meals, right, then they get into this pattern where first half of the day they don't eat anything or they eat very little, and then they overeat at the second half of the day. And nutrient handling, when you have, let's say, one big meal, is very different from when you're spacing out, especially the protein boluses, over X number of meals, right? So you can't say that, I eat 90 grams of protein in one meal is not the same as eating 30, 30, 30 over 3 meals. Completely different. Okay, so that's a great question, Maya. I hope that answered your questions. And like I said, it's going to really depend on the individual. If you're doing 4 meals, it's more like 4 hour intervals. But the 5 meals, I like to keep it at the 3 to 3.5 hour intervals. Hi, Mr. Blue. How are you? I hope you're well too. And if you have any questions in previous or recent episodes, let me know. We were just talking about timing of meals and exercise. Okay, let's see. And then we were also saying that, all right, Maya, see you. We were also saying that once a month, I'll try and uh, discuss a paper. If anyone finds a paper that they want me to discuss, send it to me, comment area in YouTube channel or on my website. Send it to me and I will look at it, and we will make sure that one of the live Q&A sessions in the month, I will actually talk about that study and um, give you my comments on it. Okay? As long as it has to do with metabolic health, health in general, I'm happy to look at the paper. And in terms of what I personally am looking at for sort of my own research and learning, right now I've been actually for several years working on learning more and understanding the immune system. So the immune system and its relation to metabolism, that's a huge one. And of course, I do a lot of obesity work. So I'm very interested in the fat cell as an organ, right? And, just how complex and sophisticated the fat cell is, and how much crosstalk there is between the fat in your body and pretty much every organ in your body. Okay. So those are my areas of sort of research now, although I'll probably read anything if it's interesting enough. Always interested in muscle. And as I said in one of my episodes, I never separate out only fat or only muscle or only bone. It's always for me fat, muscle, bone. And if I read a paper on muscle, I'm always asking myself what's happening to the fat and what's happening to the bone. So mm, probably in several weeks, somewhere down the line, I will do maybe more of an update on that fat, muscle, bone axis, because it really is a connected axis. Okay. And then one other thing that maybe I can update people on, I am currently working on a book, and okay, I'll answer that one a bit, Mr. Blue. Um, I'm working on a book. This is National Novel Writing Month, otherwise known as NaNoWriMo. NaNoWriMo. Yeah, I don't know why. But it's been going on for very many years. And traditionally, the idea is you write a draft, a complete draft of your novel within the month of November. NaNoWriMo month is always November. I started a bit late. I only realized today we're in November. Um, but I am going to try to do the full draft. And I found one of my old classmates from Warren Wilson College, where I got my MFA in fiction, and we connected on LinkedIn. And so we're partnering up. She's working on her project for the month of November, and I am too. So we're both determined to get our first drafts out by the end of the month. It's not a novel that I'm working on, it's nonfiction, but the rules are flexible for NaNoWriMo. And then you're asking, do I take new patients? Yes, we are currently taking new patients. And I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts. And we are currently also working on making our services available to people from other parts of the country. So check in with us and stay tuned on that. One way, again, is to just subscribe to my newsletter. And, as things develop, we will be updating people, but we are actively in, that process of working to make our services available to people in different parts of the country. Okay. And because I treat patients with metabolic health issues, um, you know, pretty much a whole range of chronic diseases would be what I see. So, for example, in this past week, I had a patient with stage 4 cancer, and I've had the usual metabolic, sort of chronic metabolic diseases like renal failure, and diabetes and high blood pressure. Those are generally the most common diagnoses that I deal with, but certainly inflammatory bowels, autoimmune disease, uh, multiple sclerosis, cancer, those are quite common for me as well, because those are all autoimmune diseases, PCOS, infertility, um, yeah, a whole range of different chronic diseases. And also for people who are hoping also to age well, right, and prolong their health span versus their lifespan, right? I mean, obviously, it'd be nice to have a good lifespan, long lifespan, but only if you're healthy. So the idea is to prioritize your health span and stay as healthy as possible for as long as possible. And I know that that's actually very doable, right? So helping people improve and promote their health span is a big one as well. All right. Other topics you want me to go over, or any other questions? Again, happy to do that. No? Oh, wait a while, see if there are other ones that might come in. Um, I'll just say that you're aiming for 120. That's pretty good. I think that 120 is a good number. So I'm with you on that one. I think that's doable. Okay. Oh, what was I going to say? I was sick recently, and that kind of, the whole time I was sick, I was thinking, oh my God, this is a catabolic crisis. And so I was worried about my nutrition and obviously rest. But I was trying to make sure I got my meal times in and get my fluids in. And then also prioritizing some activity, right? Don't want to be going crazy when you're sick, but still continuing to move. But then it's the recovery period and trying to now get back on my exercise program and get back on track with where I had left off. And obviously, there's been a dip because I was being sick for maybe a week and a half, right? So that I share that only because I track everything a lot. So I've been tracking the exercise, the nutrition, and so forth while sick. Because the other interest I have is in sickness behaviors. Because again, sickness behaviors are strategies to conserve and to prioritize metabolism for fighting infection and healing, right? So those behaviors are really pretty conserved across all species, and they're not a sign of laziness, and they're not a sign of being wimpy. It's really your body telling you what it needs to do to get healthier. And a lot of times we lose that connection with our bodies, and we're not able to listen well and do what is needed, right? Okay, your father lost 6 pounds. Um, yeah, 74 and on insulin. It's highly likely. so, so what I'm seeing here in the comments is you're sharing, Mr. Blue, that your father went to the doctor and lost 6 pounds, and the doctor was very excited and happy about it. But he's 74, he's on insulin, and you're saying, based on what you saw in the muscle episode, you don't think the loss is adipose, and you are correct. Um, Even without a DEXA in a diabetic on insulin, 6 pounds is very worrisome, especially at age 74. It's very hard to gain any ground just from the age. Now, you put diabetes on top of that, and you have accelerated muscle loss. Okay, so uh, that's a tough one. And it's I mean, I don't know how easy it is for you to convince him to go and get a DEXA scan. But what I find is when people get that DEXA and they see that picture of themselves with the where the fat depots are, and they look at their muscle mass in comparison to the fat mass, um, that usually makes them think. So I've had some physicians who were maybe a bit more cavalier about their body compositions until they actually did the body comp DEXA, saw their own pictures, and then went, "Oh, this doesn't look good, does it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, no." So I totally get your experience with your dad, though, and that's because I see a lot of diabetics. And I was at a meeting yesterday, and what I was saying at this meeting was that it's really hard for people to understand that their disease, mostly, especially in the earlier stages, but even in the later stages, their disease mostly could be reversible. So, I mean, we're so used to thinking, oh, you get something because it's genetic, and then now you have to be on medications the rest of your life, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's just so not true. Yeah. Frustrating because so many people have the belief it's impossible to change diet and get off insulin. Yeah. You know, the most people will say, because a lot of times patients will say that they consider that maybe they have a food addiction and that it's hard for them to wean off sugar. It's hard for them to wean off some of the junk food, right? Now, and then what people will say to me is, for example, if you have someone who has an addiction to alcohol, well, you can tell that person don't drink alcohol and nothing bad will happen, and they'll survive really well, and they'll probably continue to do very well, right? but you can't tell people not to eat food. And my whole point is that mostly they're eating chemicals, they're not eating food, right? And so people confuse food with the processed chemicals that pass as food. And that's the other thing that's very, very complicated because of our definitions of food. So potato chips are not food, okay? And your Cheetos are not food. It's really hard to get people to have that concept, and understand that no, that has nothing to do with food. And so you could survive very well without processed chemicals, right? Yes, it's true you can't survive without food, but you can survive really well without processed chemicals. So that part is really hard for people to understand. And then I think it's easier to not look at the evidence sometimes, because it feels so insurmountable to a lot of people to have to change some aspects of behavior, to have to change some aspects of their lives, right? So, one thing is to just have them consider the possibility of one small change, simply because, sometimes that's what we need is just that little spark to get things on the right foot, right? So, whether it's just not having added sugars, okay, that's a place to start. Um, and if he's willing to even consider that, I would consider that a huge victory. It's not always easy, and I certainly, all the years that I've been treating patients, it can get very frustrating. And again, I think either we're not getting that information out there enough, or even if we see that information, there's a part of your brain that doesn't want to take that in. But, a lot of uh, cancer is due to a warped uh, metabolism, right? And so, even with cancer, which people feel is so related to genetics, no, it's mostly related to epigenetics. And again, people don't want to hear that. Yeah. Um, you were reading a stat that the average time for research to be implemented in the medical community was 17 years, even when convincing double blind randomized studies were available before there's a change in the standard of care. Hmm. Wow, that's a little depressing. But if I were to look at my own experience in the medical world, I think that would be accurate. 17 years, 20 years, something like that. I heard someone say sometimes you need to get rid of one whole generation of physicians or providers, and it's that next generation that will bring about the change, hopefully. But then you have to also get that material into the curriculum, which is another big problem, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that's out there that's not getting into the curriculum. And then, what's that next generation of doctors going to do? Okay. So, for example, if we're going to look at atherosclerosis, and there's this huge ongoing thing with cholesterol, right? That's a huge topic. I probably will go into that. Um, but it's a huge topic. And that will not be one episode. That will probably be a whole module and may take a month or month and a half, even just to scrape the surface. Okay. Because there's so many aspects to consider. So yeah, with the with atherosclerosis, if you look at even in the drug development world now, okay, just if you're looking at pharma, they're they've moved on and they're looking at anti-inflammatory strategies, right? Rather than the pure get rid of cholesterol strategies. That's still making big bucks. Don't get me wrong. That's still making big bucks for them. But really, the research now, if you actually look at the pharma world, the research is on anti-inflammatory strategies for prevention or mitigation of atherosclerosis and heart disease, right? So even in that field, they're starting to admit, inflammation plays a huge role here, and that's where the research is going. So I know we're still arguing about the whole cholesterol thing, but certainly pharma is looking in other directions as well. Um, and yeah, you're bringing on the fermenting of glucose in cancers, and that's a huge and fascinating topic. I plan to do an episode on cancer metabolism, but that's going to be down the road. And I'm going to make sure that um, we cover the field. It's a huge field, but at least to not only scrape the surface, which is what I think sometimes a lot of the information out there does. It covers the surface, but it doesn't allow you to see the complexity, right? So, certainly, metabolism, the role of metabolism, the role of lipid signaling in cancer is huge, right? And I've said this a few times, but I think it bears repeating that we think of nutrients only in the context of energy, so X number of calories, maybe some metabolic pathways, right? So glycolysis, oxphos, that kind of thing, beta oxidation of fat. So certain pathways. But what we're leaving out is the signaling roles of nutrients, right? And how nutrients and nutrient senses are part of signaling pathways. They activate certain mechanisms in the cell, and for that reason, it's way more complex. Now, for example, if you take some, let's say, gluconeogenic enzymes, um, and they just look like enzymes in the cytoplasm, and they're boring. They've been around since every medical student can remember. But now we're learning that some of these enzymes may act in the nucleus as well, right? And control the transcription of certain genes. So it's actually these enzymes that are part of these metabolic pathways that are also at the same time controlling transcription of genes in the nucleus. So this is more than just um, the use of fuel. Okay, and that's the other reason. I know it was a tough decision in episode 1 to talk about metabolism the way I did. But as the episodes build, I think what I've noticed is that people go back and watch episode 1 because they're realizing I was trying to have them think about metabolism in a different way. And especially as we move further on and we get into the cancer world, we're definitely going to need the some of the groundwork in episode 1. Um, oh, let's see, who was found in Europe. Yeah, you're talking about the ancient mummified remains. It's funny you mentioned that. I wonder why you brought that up because I've been thinking about him. This is this guy in Europe. I forget where, but people have been fascinated with this mummified character because they want to know how he died. I think he was killed. He was pursued by whoever was chasing him, and he sustained some wounds, arrow wounds, if I remember. It's been a while. But they were also very interested in looking at what he ate. And so the contents of his stomach, he had a meal right before he died, which somehow makes that whole story a little bit more poignant and, you know, somehow makes him also more human and real, right? And relatable, even though it was so many years ago. Um, and you're talking about atherosclerosis, present in all people in age 40s with significant amounts of grain. Yeah, atherosclerosis, they so if we look at fatty streaks, yeah, these are fat that are found in arteries. So interestingly, if you look at some of these autopsy studies, so in babies, you will find fatty streaks as well. So I think it was in Japan, and they did a series of autopsies on infants that had died in car accidents, I believe. And even in these 1-year olds, they found fatty streaks. Yeah. And in, I believe it was some of the young men in the Vietnam War, but there are all of these autopsy studies where they found fatty streaks in young people. I do believe that fatty streaks, just fatty streaks, I think that's part of a normal physiologic process. Development of those streaks to pathologic lesions, to cause, damage to the blood vessel, and fibrosis, and, you know, uh, sort of an unstable plaque. That's a progression of fatty streaks. But I think the development of fatty streaks itself is part of normal physiology, and you see it in infants even. So, and I think that the body is able to, in general, handle that unless the balance somehow is perturbed, right? Um, only you're referencing other groups of people who don't use a Western diet and how they have low incidence of atherosclerosis and low incidence of most of the chronic diseases that plague us in the industrialized world, right? And it's interesting you say Western diet because I will say I grew up in Southeast Asia. I was born in Malaysia. I grew up in Singapore, and let me tell you, there's a lot of processed foods that I see in Asia that are sort of Asian specific, right? And there's all these snacks, and like you think about ramen noodles, for example, very Asian, right? Um, but there's a lot of processed foods in the East as well, and so I think about the time I was growing up, and already at that time, there were a lot of these different processed foods and snacks available, and that's only grown. Okay. Now, if you look at East Asians, many of them, quote unquote, look thin or they have a normal looking body type, but metabolically, they're pretty unhealthy. Okay. And I was listening to a presentation, and someone asked about the metabolic phenotype in South Asians, so people from India, for example, and how, they are somehow they visually look thinner, but they have huge incidence of heart disease, for example. So I remember talking to a doctor who was visiting a hospital in South India, and he told me that the amount of bypass surgeries that they did in that hospital per month was equal to the number of bypass surgeries his institution here in Boston does in a year. Okay. In a month, they had more bypass surgeries than the entire institution here for this doctor where he worked in a year. So significant um, significant rates of heart disease. And it's also fascinating some of the strategies they've developed to deal with the high rates of surgery. So, for example, they have hospitals. This is fascinating. Um, and if you're interested, there's a book called Reverse Innovation. I think it's called Reverse Innovation in Healthcare. I read this a while ago. Very fascinating. I was looking at bypass surgery in parts of India, and there are these hospitals where literally there's a conveyor belt because they have so many patients. And so the junior resident, surgical resident, all he or she does is do the opening incision, and then they move the patient along. The senior surgeon does the actual bypass, and then the patient is moved along, or probably they switch out the doctors. And then another junior resident, all he or she does is to close, right? So there's this real conveyor belt where one person opening incision, the senior surgeon does the actual bypass, and then, okay, you close up. And they do this all day long without a bypass machine, by the way. So this is live. Um, so usually they bypass, right? And then you stop the heart, and you can do the bypass that way. But here, that would take too much time. It's too expensive, right? And so they stitch, or make each incision between heartbeats. It's like you have to be phenomenally skilled to do that, and they have excellent surgical skills. But they've had to develop those skills because the rates of heart disease are so high in their population, right? If you look at the fat under microscope um, with South Asians, and there's a study, I'll see if I can pull that one up. But if you look histologically under the microscope, the fat cells are very different, and they look more like the sick fat that I talked about in episode 3. You can actually see it when you stain the fat cells, right? So they are these big fat cells. Even if the person is skinny, the fat cells themselves are very big, and they're not the healthier, smaller, hyperplastic fat cells. They're big, swollen fat cells, right? And that is the metabolically unhealthy phenotype. So it doesn't matter how skinny they look, those fat cells are quite sick. And that's one of the reasons they have this high rate of metabolic disease, right? So pretty interesting there when you when you actually look at the fat cells. And fat is really important for health. It's just that sometimes the way we live and our environmental factors tip the fat cells towards an unhealthy phenotype. So, in general, I think we vilify fat a lot, but you'd be very, very sick if you didn't have fat, right? Which is again why those people with lipodystrophy who don't have enough of the normal subcutaneous fat, the fat has to go somewhere, and it's now in organs, it's now in the viscera, and that's causing a lot of disease. Okay. um, Switching to vegetable ghee. Yeah, vegetable oils. Right. And ghee is usually from butter, but I guess vegetable ghee is some margarine type thing, because the oils are usually, well, I mean, the plant sources of fats are usually oils, but they have to hydrogenate it to make it solid. And yeah, that could be a problem there. So using the type of fats is a huge thing. The other thing is also, I I think if you look at the diet too, it's very carb rich, right? I mean, a lot of Asian diets are like that. So working with different populations is a big challenge. Um, I am Asian myself, and it's really hard to convince people to stop the rice, to stop the noodles. Um, a lot of people in the keto world, for example, will use glucoman, the shiitake noodles, and that can be a substitute in some circumstances. When I talked about carbs in episode 6, I referenced the soluble uh, fibers. Okay, so glucoman would fall in that range. The shiitake noodles, they would fall in that range. So they're quite soluble and they will absorb water. And this means that there's generally a lot of fermentation in the gut. And that can cause a lot of discomfort. And it may change the ecology of the gut and prioritize an inflammatory environment. So with soluble fibers, I'm a little careful. So again, that's a strategy a lot of times people have switched to because they want to have a carb-like, kind of experience with shiitake noodles or rice, right? Or they just use the glucoman flour. You can do that to cook with. And then it works for one thing, but then you have to consider what it's doing in your gut as well, right? So there's that combination, and we often focus on one aspect and we don't look at another aspect. So the same thing with nuts, right? A lot of nuts have a lot of omega 6s. So we're talking about the vegetable seed oils or, plant source seed oils. Um, so it's easy. So you avoid the safflower oil, the soybean oil, the peanut oil. Okay, great, because seed oils. But essentially, what we're trying to avoid are the omega 6s, right? So polyunsaturated fat. But you find plenty of omega 6s in nuts, for example. And more importantly, the ratio of omega 6 to omega 3 in nuts. Generally, especially the popular nuts, you have a lot more of the inflammatory omega 6s to the omega 3s. And so it's really hard to correct. It's not about just the absolute amount, but it's the ratio of the inflammatory omega 6s to the more anti inflammatory omega 3s that are really important. And so if you're having a lot of nuts, it's impossible to get that ratio right. You know, almonds, they practically have no omega 3s. So people say, oh, they don't have a lot of omega 3s in almonds, in one serving of almonds, like 100 grams. But the ratio is a 2,000 to 1, right? 2,000 to 1. 2,000 of the omega 6s to 1 of the omega 3s. It's like, wow, okay, that's an impossible ratio to work with. And you have to consider that when you look at your nutrition as well, because like I said, many keto people will be chowing down on the nuts. And by the way, when you chow down on the nuts, it's really, unless you're really measuring and counting everything, you're going to exceed your carb count if you're truly, truly trying to be ketogenic, right? Again, I don't think there's a need for people to be, but, it's sort of people seem to always think, oh, I'm in ketosis. I don't think so. All right. So we're going to wrap up in a little bit. I just want to remind people, go on the YouTube channel, VLMD Rounds. I have been taking requests. So believe me, I am noting down all the things that you put in comments and or whatever you send me on the website. And so if you have a topic you want me to do on the podcast, keep sending that in. Don't forget to send me any papers you want me to review and to bring up in the next live Q&A, which is in 2 weeks. Okay, that's number 2. Please like and subscribe. That would be very helpful. And okay, you want an episode on uric acid. Surely I will do for you an episode on uric acid. And when you talk about uric acid, you also have to talk about fructose, obviously. Yeah, big topic there. I once said to someone, yeah, gout is part of metabolic syndrome. And they thought I was joking. I was like, no, really, gout. Do you know that? And they're like, no. And then I had to look it up and show it to them. And they're like, they had no idea. So yeah, uric acid handling in the body and those metabolic pathways, definitely good topic. I'll bring that one up. And then when you talk about um, the uric acid besides fructose, you also want to talk about water handling in your body. So we'll cover all of that when I do that episode, right? And then did I get your request? No, I didn't get that request, but now I know it. So I will definitely be working on that. So yeah, send me your requests. Send me your papers if you want me to review them. I can probably only do one per month, just because of my time. And subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the newsletter, go to my website, go to the YouTube channel, VLMD Rounds, and however else you want to connect. I have LinkedIn and Instagram, which I'm planning to be more active on. I'm learning all these social media platforms, so I'm getting there. Okay? All right. Thank you for joining me in this live Q&A. I will see you next time, and please keep watching and keep listening. Take care. Bye.